This week on Quality Digest Live, we'll chat with Chad Chrysostomo of Faro Technologies about high speed, high accuracy, and high definition scanning. Plus, we'll get a galactic lesson in quality. That and more when we come back. Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for March 6th, 2015. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Mike Richmond, publisher of Quality Digest. Well, last week I was off the show on assignment. This week my trusty partner Dirk Ducharme is off on a well-deserved vacation. So we're going to start the show this week with an interesting story from the American Society for Mechanical Engineering, the ASME, which is offering its younger cohort an opportunity to network, gain visibility, and sharpen their presentation skills all in 10 minutes or less. That's the premise behind the ASME's Future ME Mini Talk series, which offers engineers at the beginnings of their careers a platform to share their experiences with a large number of their peers. These talks, which generally are within a small forum on a small panel, last just 7 to 10 minutes, but they pack in a lot of interesting information in that time. Prior mini talks have focused on topics of high interest, such as 3D printing, safety, career development, and much, much more. Now, there are two future ME mini talk opportunities scheduled for this year. The first will be held on August 2nd at ASME's 2015 International Design Engineering Technical Conference and Computers and Information in Engineering Conference. Wow, better known as the IDETC, probably better to refer to it that way, in Boston. Opportunity number two comes up on November 15th at ASME's 2015 International Mechanical Engineering Conference and Expo, the IMECE, in Houston. So if you're an engineer early in his or her career and you want to participate in future ME mini talks at one of these two locations later this year, or if you want to perhaps nominate a colleague for the honor, you have just a few more weeks to act. The deadline is April 1st, and application information can be found right below the story link, just below the video player screen. As usual, all the stories that I'm going to be covering on today's show are available right down there as well. So check that out. And again, if you have somebody that you want to nominate, you want to perhaps participate yourself in that, the link is right down there, and check it out to see how you can act on that today. Okay, well, we're going to stick now with the theme of technology and engineering because our first guest on the show, who we're going to welcome in just a moment, is a terrific engineer and metrologist, Chad Chrysostomo of Faro Technologies. Faro, of course, as you all know, is an industry-leading provider of 3D measurement, imaging, and realization technology. Faro's mission is to help today's high-tech manufacturers reduce inspection times, scan materials with challenging contrast, reflectivity, and part complexity, and produce high-definition data that's reliable, repeatable, and highly accurate. To answer this need, Faro recently released its newest product, the Faro Edge ScanArm HD, a lightweight and portable coordinate measuring machine that offers both contact as well as non-contact measurement. Dirk is going to be back in time to host a webinar on this very topic called Next Generation 3D Scanning, Fast, High Definition, and Affordable, which we'll be bringing to you this coming Tuesday, March 10th at our usual time of 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Chad Chrysostomo, again the technical product manager for the Faro ARM product line, will be the presenter of this webinar. And now, to explore some of the topics that he and Dirk are going to be covering next week, we're very pleased to have Chad join us now via Skype. Hello, Chad.
Hey, Mike, how's it going?
Good to see you again. This is your second time, I think, on the show. We're happy to have you back, of course. Well, let's jump right into it. Capture rates for scanners, as many of us know, keep climbing. Faro's new Edge ScanArm HD, for example, captures more than 500,000 points. I think the number is 560,000 points per second. But Correct. Do you think there's a trade-off between capture rates and accuracy?
I think there is a trade-off, but to a certain extent. Precision-wise, fast capture rate's great because as you move the LP across a part, you get a nice, even distribution of points. The more points you take, the more information there is to average out on the surface, and that results in more consistent data, I believe. However, if we're talking about metrology-grade accuracy, on the micron level, I would say that capture rate doesn't really affect accuracy as much. I would say the accuracy is more affected by the range of the laser that you have.
And what are some of the applications? I mean, what are some of the industries and sectors that we're talking about here in which these capture rates and accuracy really are most important?
We'll start off anything with plastics. We're big in machining and metalwork. We also have any place that requires reverse engineering. 3D printing is also another big industry that we're in as well. Aerospace and the automotive industry.
Yeah, those are all ones that we hear a lot of that are using your equipment. Now, the last few trade shows that we've been to, I'm speaking now for Dirk as well as myself and the rest of the team here at Quality Digest, everyone's been touting blue light. So why should we care? What does it mean when we talk about what color a scanner's light is?
All right. Well, our previous models actually employed red lasers for the laser line probe. When a red laser actually projects onto a surface at a specific angles, laser dispersion occurs. And that laser dispersion can be interpreted as noise by an LLP camera. When an LLP camera views the same data, but with a blue laser, it actually results in less noise, so you get more accurate data as well as cleaner data. This is great for when you're trying to scan a reflective surface or a diverse material in general.
So again, it's a color spectrum issue, and I'm not sure I exactly understand what that is in terms of the blue light in particular.
We prefer to call it speckle suppression, so it's just cleaner data.
Cleaner data. Okay, so basically you can acquire better data, bring better data in, cleaner data of those 560,000 points again that we've talked about, of course.
Correct.
So, all right, so let's back up a little bit and talk a little bit about the mechanics of this, the physical hardware mechanics of this. What are the advantages of a scanner that would be attached to a portable arm as opposed to a handheld scanner?
Okay, well, a handheld scanner actually relies on stitching scans together as well as depth perception. I think two advantages that a portable scan arm has over handheld scanners are better accuracy and better resolution. We have a better accuracy because we use the arm as a localizer to track the LP as it moves in space. We also have better resolution because of the optics that we employ inside the laser line probe for more affordable price. I also think another advantage that we have is that regardless of how complex the shape of the part is, whether it's simple or complex, excuse me, you don't have to rely on sticker targets.
And that's the arm right there, right behind you, that we're going to be looking at here, I guess, on Tuesday, correct?
Correct. Yep, you are correct. We'll also be doing a live demonstration of the HD abilities. That's
cool. Well, we talked earlier about how scanners are capturing more and more points per second. Again, the number, which I've said now 3 times because I think it's cool, is 560,000 points per second. Yeah. So what problems does that pose in terms of crunching the data in a point cloud that might have, I mean, when you talk about it, I mean, ultimately that point cloud might have tens of millions of points. So what does that present in terms of data analysis?
Okay, no, that's an excellent question. Accepting loads of point cloud data can slow down a program very easily, especially if the user is not that savvy with point clouds. But just like video games and smartphones and tablets, laser scanning is actually evolving to be more and more demanding on computer processing, as well as requiring more RAM. It's important to educate our consumers that upgrading to a high-definition laser line probe will require updating your hardware as well, because we're really pushing the limits of technology. We're talking about high-definition data, but you're also getting quality resolution along with it. But honestly, in the end, I think it all depends about your application. Are you doing reverse engineering or are you doing inspection? If you're doing reverse engineering, you want to try to keep as much point clouds as possible. But when you're concerned with inspection, you're more concerned with the accuracy, so you can try to tone down the capture rate a little bit, and that'll decrease some of those, the chugging the computer has to do for processing.
Yeah, that's what I like about the technologies we're seeing develop now, is it's really flexible. I mean, you don't have to necessarily use it to the nth degree of what the potential is in terms of data. You can scale it down a little bit based on what your system and your application is, correct?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. One other thing I can mention is that, point cloud softwares are actually getting smarter as well, and you can try to play around with the filters that they employ. For example, like decimation, which it actually only uses about 1/10 or 1/2 of the data that you actually grab. So that's great for inspection. We also employ a filter on the laser line probe called a movement filter. So if the laser line probe moves a specific distance, it'll take a point. But if it stays still, it won't capture any data, and that'll save you time on collecting too much data.
Gotcha. So basically everything that we just talked about, we talked about in a short time frame, but the things that we talked about there are things that we're going to be expanding on at greater depth, obviously, in the 1-hour webinar we have coming up, I guess, on Tuesday.
Yep.
Great, great, cool. Well, everybody out there should, of course, look forward to that webinar. Again, it's going to be this Tuesday, coming up March 10th, at our normal time of webinars, which is 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Keep your eye on your email inbox, everybody out there, for details about how to register. We're sending e-blasts out to you all right now to get in on that. You can also visit the registration page through the link, which is right below Chad's name on the video player screen right down there. So Chad, again, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to look forward to seeing you and Dirk on Tuesday to talk a little bit more about your new technology and how people can use it.
Definitely.
Great.
Nice talking to you, Mike.
Good talking to you too, Chad. Thanks again for joining us.
Sure thing.
Good. All right, again, yes, so be sure to join us there. You can see it on your screen, I think. Yeah, there it is right there. The next generation 3D scanning, fast, high definition, and affordable. That webinar with Chad and Dirk is going to be coming up here on Tuesday the 10th at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, so make sure you register for it today. Okay, well, I'm going to turn now to a feature article that we thought was really interesting because it deals with process and procedures, which is something that all of us, I think, are very familiar with, and how you know that your process and your procedure is accurate. So the question is really, have you ever read instructions that seem to have no connection to what you're doing or building? Or instructions that assume you have some knowledge that you don't have, or don't include certain steps because assume that you should already know those steps, right? I mean, I do that every time I have to put something together from IKEA. I mean, if you think about it and you imagine that those instructions are used to build or test a product that's going to be sent to customers, or provide instructions about how to deal with certain customer service situations, you can see it's a problem. In other words, your standard operating procedures are actually risk factors within your organization, if you think about it. Bad SOPs can ruin product and/or service delivery, so this is a big problem. The good news is that it's a situation that's easy to avoid. That's according to the latest article, 12 Ways to Improve Procedures, from the anonymous QA Farm. Who is the QA Farm? It's an anonymous person who writes for us. He or she needs to keep his or her identity secret in order to provide the insider information we love. But that article from the QA Farm ran in Wednesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. Now, this is great advice. The great advice found in the piece is really just common sense. First, you need to understand the purpose of your procedure. In other words, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? Maybe it's a step-by-step guide to testing a product, or maybe it's instructions about how to fill out paperwork to meet regulatory requirements. So you have to understand that first. After you understand that, the next thing you want to do is you want to create a flow chart so you can understand how the process is supposed to work. And anybody who has ever done a process map or flow chart will tell you that this procedure, this process itself, is very, very revealing. Better yet, once you have a good flow chart, the procedure really almost writes itself. That is, the text simply describes what the flow chart shows, and that makes sense too, because you're doing all the work to get the flow chart exactly right. From there, you should be able to identify those process steps, write them out in the procedure that goes hand in hand with that flow chart. And by the way, this is a really important piece of this. Get the people who are actually going to be using the procedure involved early on. This is where tech writers, or the person who has been pigeonholed to write a procedure, often makes their first and most important mistake. They look to their own knowledge or an expert's knowledge on how something is, again, supposed to work, and they don't ask the people who are going to be using the procedure how the process actually works. Again, that's a big mistake. I mean, it's just logical. The people that do it are the ones that need to be taught how to do it better, perhaps. They also can tell you better how it's being done, so that you can help share that with other people across the organization. Now, as counterintuitive as this all sounds, experts are really the wrong people to write procedures. They assume certain knowledge, which leads them to skip steps. That's kind of what you would call the everybody knows that syndrome, right? Everybody knows that. You don't have to include that in there. That's common knowledge. Well, no, it's not. And even if just 5% of your audience that you're writing the procedure for doesn't know what that means, even just 5%, 1 in 20, that's a big disconnect potentially in the organization. So you need to really get rid of jargon and or technical terms to indicate or allude to a step rather than spell out that step. For example, for any of you cooks out there, this is a really good example, I think. Have you ever run across a recipe that tells you to chiffonade your basil or butterfly your chicken breast? Well, that's great, but only if you know what chiffonade or butterfly means. If you don't, you're going to want to have that spelt out exactly step by step what those terms mean so that you can prepare your recipe accordingly. A good procedure does the exact same thing. It exactly spells out how to do everything step by step in the simplest and most common language, free of jargon. You may think your jargon is known by everybody, but trust me, it's not. So break it down into the most simple possible language to describe it. Now, obviously, a procedure needs to be clearly written. Whatever you do, don't ask someone to write a procedure who doesn't know how to write in the first place. You would think that that would be common sense, but not always. Make sure people who are going to write procedures can write, can express their thoughts clearly with words, very important. Be sure to keep the style consistent throughout all your procedures. Have rules or style guides on how a procedure should be organized and formatted, how certain terms are spelled out or used, and what abbreviations mean. A consistent style ensures that from one document to the next, users know what to expect. Remember, somebody has to use these procedures. You're not writing for them, you're writing for them, if not more so, than you are for the company or regulators who may be looking at that procedure later. It's really for the people that are going to be using it. Keep that front and foremost in your mind. Finally, document control, and this is critical. You don't want old procedures floating around. You really need to control your documents. You need a system to automatically remove and or update old procedures when a new version comes out. Also, you need to know who owns the procedure and who signs off on procedural changes. I just gave you just a very brief outline of the story. There's a lot more here in this article. I certainly encourage you to read it. QA Farm, again, it's an anonymous contributor to us, often looking at FDA concerns. Really interesting stuff from the QA Farm. If you haven't read the QA Farm's material, please do check it out. Again, you can search for content by QA Farm in our search box and get all of his or her information, all the articles that we've had from the QA Farm and QDD, and check them out. In my opinion, in terms of this article, as a person who works in the media and understands somewhat the intricacies of communication to a diffuse audience, this article really is a must read. If you need to write procedures, or you're even thinking about beginning to write or rewrite your procedures, please read this article. You're going to get a lot out of it. Read it through, maybe read it through twice. It's written in very clear language. He takes her own advice on the piece, and it's very well done. So check that out and comment on it. Again, we always encourage you to comment on our articles. All right. Well, for our final feature article this week, we're going to turn for a little help to our head honcho, the big cheese, the man himself, Jeff Dewar, who is the CEO of Quality Digest's parent company, Millennium 360. Jeff has been writing a lot for us lately, and his most recent article, A Galactic Lesson in Quality, appeared in Tuesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. As would befit, I think, an article with such a grand title, this is a far-ranging, and thought-provoking piece about leadership, motivation, and the power of personal gravity. So to help us bring it all down to earth, we're joined now by our very own Jeff Dewar. Hello, Jeff.
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
Good. How are you doing today?
Good, good.
Good. Well, thanks for joining us. Well, you start off your piece with a big picture approach, and it doesn't get much bigger picture than this because it's a photo, as I think you can see right there, spanning about, I think about 10 billion light years of space and time, give or take. So why use astrophysics to convey lessons about leaders and leadership?
Yeah, well, a couple of reasons. One is it's a personal interest of mine, in particular the public understanding of science. And I admire a lot the work that Neil deGrasse Tyson is doing and Professor Lawrence Krauss at ASU. and particularly Alan Alda, the actor, the Alan Alda Center for Communication of Science out at Stony Brook University in New York. And so the personal interest side, I thought was something that just made it very easy for me to do it. But secondly, it's just a very solid metaphor. I mean, there's metaphors and there's metaphors. And when I started thinking about it from that angle, it just makes the point so beautifully.
It is, and a term that you used, speaking of metaphors, which I think was interesting and grabbed me right away, was the term gravity. Gravity is an interesting word. If you think about all of its different ramifications, it can mean importance or seriousness. It can represent attraction, and it can convey a kind of an irresistible physical force. So, how did you mean that analogy?
I meant it by I like your list. I like the one for sure. I meant it the last one that you gave, the irresistible force, and by that I meant that you cannot be around a leader that has that kind of enthusiasm, that kind of personal involvement, and not feel the gravity, the irresistible pull towards what you're doing. And my favorite example is Herb Kelleher, the retired chairman of Southwest Airlines and one of the three co-founders, and he was the CEO for many, many years. And there's a great 60 Minutes piece that I referenced in the article that shows him, walking along the aisles, dispensing peanuts and serving drinks and joking around. And he's kind of a jokester, but that's not the point. It's that he's out there in the trenches. He's doing it. He's scooping the ice. He's kind of making fun of the crunchy ice that they have, and it's irresistible. I mean, for me as a passenger, and I fly all the airlines. I fly Southwest out here on the West Coast quite a bit, and it's irresistible for me just to watch that 60 Minutes piece and get pulled into his enthusiasm and pleasure. And I worked with a number of the other airlines in a consulting capacity many years ago, and I can tell you that the CEOs do not, at least from any interviews of any of the rank and file that I spoke with during those assignments, actually get out there and put on the apron and serve the drinks and so on. I mean, there may be an occasional thing, but Herb Kelleher was known for constantly doing this. And you as an employee couldn't get off the plane and not be affected by that kind of gravity.
Well, it's interesting because you talk about that. The gravity that drew you in was through a TV show. I mean, it wasn't even a personal connection with the guy.
I know, absolutely.
And I think that's true. In great organizations, leaders I really lead. And you use the example of Herb Kelleher, of Walt Disney, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, and you drive it home by looking at those folks. And so, what did they have in common? What was the secret sauce, if you will, that set those leaders apart from run-of-the-mill managers? Big difference between leading and managing.
Yeah, I could give you the easy answer that I think, you can read in a lot of articles. It's a passion, but that's kind of a superficial answer. The real answer is the personal level involvement. In the article, there's a picture of Walt Disney with his sleeves rolled up out there working with the cartoonists. There's like 18 levels between him and the guys on the rank and file cartoonist floor. But he's in there, and you can't, you just can't imagine the effect that has. And Elon Musk is out there, and he's in his overcoat underneath the cars, and flashlights and screwdrivers, and that sort of personal, deep involvement is, I think, the real answer is that communicates it. Even if you're cussing and swearing, instead of joking around, and maybe you're not that pleasant to be around, but it's that personal level involvement that causes that gravity to draw people towards the right kind of behaviors and the attention of what you're saying is important.
And why does it matter? I mean, that's actually something that's just kind of coming to me now. Why does that matter so much? I mean, it matters, of course, for customers of the company who get that sense from another name that came to my mind was Sam Walton back in the day, who really promote themselves as being customer-centric. But what does that do for the rank and file within the organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's the living, breathing example of if this is important enough for our CEO, our vice presidents, our plant managers, our general managers, whatever, to be doing, then it's probably important enough for us to be paying attention to as well. I think it's as simple as that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think you're right. Well, I want to show you and the audience a comment to your article from one of our readers and read it to you as well, because I think it was interesting and I think you might want to respond to it. This comes from the QD user with the handle ScottVols50, I believe that is his handle, who says, "No one's behavior is bent by a leader. Leaders attract like-minded people who wish to be like the leader they follow. No one follows a leader they do not like and cannot be bent to do so." How would you respond to that?
Oh, I think that's just silly. I appreciate Scott's comment very much, but that's just baloney. I mean, I worked for a guy named Mark. I won't tell you his last name. He was a tremendous leader in some ways, and he had some great ideas about the intersection between quality and training technology. And training methodology, and he did some things that were just amazing. And I personally followed him, and all of my colleagues followed him, because we believed in the potential of what he saw, of the direction that he was taking us. I didn't personally like the guy very much. I thought he was a bit extravagant and extreme, and a bit egocentric and a few other things. But there's no question that the gravity that he brought to his love and passion and inquiry of training methodology very much bent every one of our behaviors, myself included. And I can give you an example of someone a very famous CEO who was by many people in their organization very much despised. They couldn't stand him. They hated when he showed up for a meeting, and he was somebody to be avoided by many people. And that man's name, and yet people followed him to the ends of the earth with the way that he led and with the vision that he laid out in front of them. And that man's name is Steve Jobs. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people think of Steve Jobs as this great manager. And in Walter Isaacson's biography, he actually talks about it. Steve Jobs, countless times, terrible manager. And he only began in his later years, in his late 40s, early 50s, to really begin to settle down and take a more thoughtful approach, and embraced some of the things that a good manager has to do. But in terms of that gravitational leadership of innovation and constant creativity, there was no question that he was leading ever since he first formed Apple.
Yeah, I think maybe what Scott's referring to in his comment there too is this idea that bending isn't always a good thing. I mean, if you do have a leader that's not all those things, who is egocentrical but also isn't effective, maybe like Steve Jobs was earlier in his career, maybe it's not so much bending as it is warping the organization. You think that's fair to say?
Oh yeah, I think, and Deming, he talked about it a lot, where power is derived. And he said the first and foremost a source of power as a leader and as a manager is your authority of office. And so by the very nature that anyone in a position and that's responsible for giving your performance reviews and all that, I mean, they automatically inherit tremendous power in that regard. And so it's incumbent upon, I won't say them to use good judgment because that's kind of obvious, it's incumbent upon their boss to make sure that that leader, that manager is using that power appropriately. And I've seen a lot of absentee bosses, above bosses that should have been better supervised in that regard.
Well, Jeff, it's a great article. I encourage everyone out there to read it. I always love your stuff, Jeff. I'm not just saying that. You always have an interesting perspective on things. This is a good one. I like astrophysics myself, so you struck a good chord with me. So thanks for writing it. Thanks for joining us today. And we'll see you soon.
All right. Watch for my next article on evolution.
We can't wait for it. Looking forward to it. Thanks, Jeff. All right. Well, finally this week, we're going to close the show with the tweet of the week. This one comes from Twitter user and QD columnist Jesse Lee Stoner, who advises readers to, quote, "Be intensely curious. A good question can take you a lot further than a quick answer." Well, that's good advice. I think it's good advice from Jesse Lee Stoner. Thanks, Jesse. And as always, for more great tweets on quality, management, customer service, and a lot more, you can always find us on Twitter at Quality Digest. All right, well, that's our show for this week. Thank you all for joining us. I want to remind you all to check out the FARA webinar on Tuesday. Again, March 10th, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. It's going to be a good one with Chad Chrysostomo and Dirk. Thank you, Chad, again for joining us earlier today. Thank you, Jeff Dewar, for joining us too just a moment ago. Talk about galactic lessons in quality. Thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again next week for another big week of QDD. And of course, next Friday for QDL with Dirk and I both here next week, so you can look forward to that. So that's it. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll see you next week.